A figure, no gender, no name, hands pressed against its face, mouth open in a scream you will never hear. You know exactly which one it is, and you know what it stirs inside you. Not admiration, not intellectual curiosity, something deeper, something you recognize without being able to explain. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt a scream inside you that never came out? This man felt it, and instead of swallowing it, he picked up a brush. But what almost nobody knows is that the scream was only the moment the world looked up. The story of Edvard Munch begins long before that and goes far beyond it. Today, you are going to meet the man behind the most haunting image in the history of art. Edvard Munch was born in 1863 in a small town in Norway called Løten. And from the very beginning, life made sure to teach him something most of us only learn far too late: that pain does not knock before it enters. His mother died when he was 5 years old. Tuberculosis, a disease that had no cure at the time, one that took its time, draining life in small daily doses. Edvard was too young to understand death, but old enough to feel the absence. And absence, as you know, carries a weight that no presence can ever explain. His father, Christian Munch, was a military doctor, a man of intense, almost severe faith. He raised his children inside a religiosity that bordered on terror. He spoke of hell as if it were the room next door. He spoke of death as punishment. And Edvard grew up hearing this every night before going to sleep. At one point, already an adult, he wrote, "Ever since I was born, the angels of anxiety, restlessness, and death stood by my side. They terrified me with death, hell, and eternal damnation. Sometimes I would wake up at night and look around. Was I in hell?" A child who wakes in the middle of the night not knowing if he is alive or condemned. This boy did not invent fear. He was raised inside it. And then came another loss. His older sister, Sophie. She died at 15, also tuberculosis. Edvard was 14, and he stayed by her side until the end. That scene never left him. Years later, he painted it. The work is called The Sick Child, a red-haired girl lying in bed, pale, looking toward the light coming through the window. A woman beside her with her head bowed, unable to face what is coming. The canvas is dark, heavy, but carries a light that hurts, a light that seems to be saying goodbye. Munch repainted that work 6 times throughout his life. 6 times, as if painting were the only way to process what words could never hold. He himself said it was the most important painting he ever made. Not the Scream, not the Madonna, The Sick Child. because it came from the deepest place he knew. And here you begin to understand something about this man. Munch did not paint to decorate walls. He painted to survive. Still young, he began attending art school in Oslo, then called Christiania. His early works were solid, technical, within what was expected of an academic artist of the time. Landscapes like Maridalen, portraits like Aunt Karen in the rocking chair, domestic scenes like girl kindling a stove and at the coffee table. Beautiful works, competent. The kind that could have been the entire career of any other artist. But Munch was not any other artist. He was absorbing the world around him, learning technique not to repeat it, but to eventually break it. Like someone who learns the rules of a language before creating their own. And Oslo at that time was a city in ferment, full of intellectuals, writers, anarchists, people who questioned everything: religion, morality, the role of art. Munch dove into that world. He frequented bohemian circles, met radical thinkers, grew close to figures like Hans Jaeger, a philosopher and writer who preached the liberation of customs and a life lived without masks. Jaeger used to say, "Write your life." Munch listened and traded the pen for the brush. In 1889, Munch received a government grant and left for Paris. He was 26 years old, and Paris at that time was the center of the art world. Impressionism, post-impressionism, symbolism. Van Gogh, Gauguin, Toulouse-Lautrec. The air of Paris smelled of paint and revolution, and Munch breathed all of it with open lungs. But while he was there, his father died. Far from home, no time to say goodbye. More absence, one more loss that arrived without warning. And something changed in him after that. As if the last rope still tying him to any idea of safety had snapped, he became freer and more lost at the same time. Those two things, tend to come together. It was during this period that he produced works like Night in St. Cloud, a dark room, a window, a solitary figure looking out at the river below. No drama, no scream, just silence. The kind of silence that only exists when you are surrounded by people and still feel completely elate. And the view of the river at St. Cloud tells the other side of that same coin. Light, water, movement, but painted by someone watching from a distance. Someone who sees life happening without quite being able to step into it. Munch was not an artist who stayed on the outside out of shyness. He stayed on the outside because he saw too much. And those who see too much rarely manage to simply relax and enjoy. Back in Norway, he began developing what he would call the frieze of life, an ambitious, almost obsessive project. A series of works organized around themes: love, anxiety, fear, death. Like chapters of a book he was writing in paint over decades. And it was during this time that he painted Summer Night, Inger on the shore. His sister Inger, sitting on the rocks by the water, dressed in white, looking toward the horizon. The scene is almost serene, but there is something in it that unsettles, a stillness that is not peace. It is waiting, the kind of waiting that does not know quite what it is waiting for. Munch understood that feeling better than anyone, and Oslo was changing too. The city he knew was becoming denser, more agitated, more full of faces that did not look at each other. He painted this in Spring Day on Karl Johan Street. A busy street, colorful umbrellas, people in motion, an ordinary scene. But with that strange quality Munch had, where everything seems to be happening behind glass. You are there, but you are not inside. It was also during this period that Munch grew closer to writers and philosophers who thought about the human condition in raw, direct ways. August Strindberg, the Swedish dramatist. Friedrich Nietzsche, whose ideas about the individual and conventional morality resonated deeply within him. These were not superficial influences. They were conversations that shaped how he saw the world and, consequently, how he painted it. And then came 1892, a year that would change everything. The Union of Berlin Artists invited him to exhibit. He brought his work, and the scandal was immediate. Works considered disturbing, unfinished, too aggressive for the standards of the time. The exhibition was closed after 1 week. But here is the detail history never forgets. The scandal made Munch's name explode across Europe. Sometimes being censored is the best thing that can happen to an artist, because nothing draws more attention than someone trying to silence a voice. And Munch's voice was far from being silenced. It was, in fact, about to scream. There was a bridge on the outskirts of Oslo, a simple wooden bridge over the Oslo fjord. Munch knew it well. He walked across it often, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone with his own thoughts. On an afternoon in 1892, he was there with 2 friends. The sun was setting, and then something happened. He described it himself in his diaries. I was walking along the road with friends when the sun set. The sky turned a bloody red. I paused, feeling exhausted, and leaned on the fence. There was blood and tongues of fire above the blue-black fjord and the city. My friends walked on, and I stood there trembling with anxiety. And I sensed an infinite scream passing through nature. His friends kept walking. They saw nothing. They felt nothing. And Munch stood there, alone, while the world around him seemed to dissolve into waves of color and terror. There is something profoundly lonely in that moment, not just the fear, but the fact that the people beside him did not see the same sky. They were in the same place, at the same instant, and yet inhabited completely different worlds. Have you ever lived that? Being in the middle of a conversation, a party, a dinner, and feeling that what is happening inside you has nothing to do with what is happening around you. Munch lived that way all the time. And instead of convincing himself he was wrong, he went back to his studio and painted. The work we know as the Scream actually exists in 4 main versions, plus a lithograph, each one with its own language, its own weight, its own texture. The most famous, from 1893, made with tempera and pastel on cardboard, is the one that carries that central figure with the elongated face, hands pressed against the cheeks, mouth wide open. But notice, she is not screaming at someone. She is screaming because she cannot not scream, because the world around her became too large, too loud, too red. The figure has no defined face, no gender, no name. And that is precisely what makes it universal. You can place yourself inside it without effort, because at some point in life, all of us have been that figure on the bridge. The burning sky is not only poetic. There is a theory connecting that specific shade of red to the eruption of the Krakatoa volcano in 1883 in Indonesia. The eruption was so violent that it altered the atmosphere of the entire planet. For months, sunsets in many parts of the world turned extraordinarily red. Oslo was no exception. Munch was 20 years old when he first saw those skies, and that image was burned into him like a visual scar. The second version of The Scream, also from 1893, has a different quality. Rawer, less refined, as if he had painted it in a hurry, afraid of losing the feeling before it slipped away. The 1895 lithograph translates all of this into black and white, and curiously, without color, the scream becomes louder. The lines grow more aggressive, more cutting, as if the absence of color forces you to pay attention only to the form, only to pure despair. The colored pastel, also from 1895, is the most commercially recognized of the series. In 2012, it was auctioned for nearly $120 million, the highest price ever paid for a work at auction at that time. And the 1910 version holds something different from the others. The face of the figure seems even more dissolved, as if Munch, almost 2 decades later, still had not finished processing that afternoon on the bridge. But the scream did not arrive alone. It was preceded by a work called Despair from 1892. Same bridge, same red sky. but the central figure is turned away, hunched over the railing, looking down. It is the same emotional moment, but without yet the courage to face it head on. And it was followed by Anxiety from 1894. This time, multiple figures, all wearing that same hollow, disturbed expression, walking toward the viewer. The sky still red, the bridge still present, but now the fear does not belong to one man only. It belongs to everyone. Munch was building something larger than a single work. He was mapping the human interior with the precision of a cartographer of the invisible. And in 1903, he painted something few people know but which says everything about who he was. The self-portrait in hell. Himself, nude, standing against a background of flame, without excessive drama, without a heroic pose, just a man looking at the viewer as if to say, "This is where I live. This is where I paint from." It is not a confession of defeat. It is a declaration of brutal honesty. If death was the first language Munch ever learned, love was the second, and he learned it in the worst possible way. By feeling too much, losing every time, and being unable to pretend he was fine when he was not. Munch never married, never had children, but he had women, and each one left a mark you can see in the canvases if you know where to look. His first great passion was with a married woman. He was 22. She was older, experienced, free in her customs, in a way that Oslo at the time did not approve of. The affair lasted years. It ended badly. It ended with a kind of pain that does not disappear, but only changes shape over time. And Munch painted it. The Madonna from 1894 is not a religious image in the conventional sense. It is a woman with closed eyes, head tilted back, in a kind of ecstasy that blends the sacred and the carnal in a way the era found scandalous. The background is dark, warm, almost organic, and she floats within it as if she belongs to another plane. Munch saw women as something simultaneously sacred and terrifying, not out of misogyny, but because love, for him, always came accompanied by loss. And when you learn that equation too early, you begin to associate the two automatically. To love and to lose. To draw close and be destroyed. The work Vampire from 1895 is perhaps the rawest expression of that vision. A red-haired woman draped over a man, embracing his head, her face buried in his neck. At first glance, it looks like tenderness, almost maternal. But the title leaves no doubt about what Munch was feeling. Curiously, he himself said at certain moments that the work could simply be a woman kissing a man on the neck, that the title was given by others, not by him, And perhaps that is precisely what makes it so disturbing, because you do not know. You look at it and cannot decide whether it is love or destruction, whether she is protecting him or consuming him. That ambiguity was intentional. Munch understood that love is rarely just one thing. There was another woman, Tulla Larson, wealthy, independent, in love with him in a way he could not match in equal intensity. The relationship was turbulent, long, full of comings and goings, and it ended in a way that left a mark, literally, on Munch's body. On a night in 1902, there was an argument, a revolver, an accidental shot. Munch lost part of a finger on his left hand, the hand he painted with. He never fully forgave and never forgot. That episode deepened in him a distrust of intimate relationships that already existed, but which from that moment on became almost a wall. And then came The Mermaid from 1896, a female figure at the edge of the sea, under moonlight, half human, half mystery, beautiful and unreachable, present and unreal, like someone you desire, but know you will never be able to hold. Munch painted women the way he painted the red sky, with fascination and fear, with desire and distance. There was also The Day After, from 1895, a woman lying on a bed, arms loose at her sides, bottles on the table. There is no judgment in the canvas, no moralism, just a human figure on the morning after something that was not good, carrying that specific exhaustion that is not only physical. You recognize that exhaustion. Everyone does. And that is why Munch crosses time. Not because he painted with great technical skill, but because he painted with truth. Evening on Karl Johann Street from 1892 shows a crowd walking toward the viewer. Pale faces, empty eyes, expressions that express nothing. They are people, but they look like ghosts. And in the middle of them, or rather moving against the current, a solitary figure walking in the opposite direction. Munch was always that figure, walking the wrong way, seeing what others did not see, feeling what others preferred not to feel. And in 1903, when he painted the self-portrait in hell, he was not being dramatic. He was being precise, because Munch's hell had no literal flames. It was made of love that hurts, of loss that does not pass, of beauty that frightens. It was made of everything he could not stop painting. There is a point in the lives of certain people when the accumulated weight of everything they have lived rises to the surface all at once. It is not weakness, it is physics. It is the moment when the body and the mind decide they cannot carry it alone anymore. For Munch, that moment came in 1908. He was in Copenhagen, 45 years old, decades of losses, of relationships that destroyed, of alcohol that numbed, of a mind that never fully rested. And then he suffered a severe nervous breakdown. He was admitted to a psychiatric clinic under the care of Dr. Daniel Jacobson. He stayed there for 8 months. And here is something most people do not know. It was inside that clinic that Munch began to reorganize himself. Not to heal, because certain things never heal completely, but to reorganize, like someone who dismantles a house from the inside and decides, piece by piece, what to keep and what to let go. He stopped drinking. He adopted a routine. He began taking care of his own body in a way he never had before. And when he left the clinic in 1909 and returned to Norway, there was something different in his eyes. It was not peace. It was clarity. And clarity, for an artist like Munch, is a dangerous and powerful instrument at the same time. He settled at Ekeli, a property on the outskirts of Oslo, a large house, gardens, studios improvised outdoors. He painted anywhere. He left canvases exposed to the weather, to rain, to sun. He said that nature was also a brush. The works from this period are different, broader, more luminous in certain moments, as if he had discovered that he could look toward the light without necessarily fleeing from it. But the darkness never left completely. It simply changed address. In 1919, the world was swept by the Spanish flu, one of the greatest pandemics in history. Munch was infected. He became gravely ill, and when he recovered, he did something few artists would have the courage to do. He painted himself right after. Self-portrait. After the Spanish influenza is one of the most honest images you will find in Munch's entire body of work. A man in a chair, pale, with the look of someone who has just stared death in the face and come back. There is no heroism in the canvas, no dramatic relief. Just a man who survived and does not yet know quite what to do with that. You look at that painting and feel the weight of being alive when you did not expect to be. And then in 1929, already 65 years old, he painted Building the Winter Studio at Ekeli. A work completely different from everything that made him famous. Workers, scaffolding, construction, movement, as if he were documenting something concrete happening around him after decades of painting what happened within. It is almost moving. A man who spent his entire life mapping the human interior, looking out the window, and simply painting what he saw outside. But even in this calmer, more organized phase, Munch never abandoned the themes that defined him. He kept revisiting old works, creating new versions, entering into dialogue with the younger man he had once been. Like someone who rereads letters written decades earlier and recognizes the handwriting but cannot quite remember who that person was. The Girls on the Bridge, which he painted for the first time in 1900 and returned to several times afterward, has that quality. Young figures seen from behind, looking down at the water. No faces, no visible story. Just that suspended moment between what is and what is yet to come. Munch was always fascinated by that threshold, by the moment before, by the person who does not yet know what is going to happen. Perhaps because he himself had lived so much that he knew exactly what comes next, and preferred to remain in the before. And the Self-Portrait in Hell from 1903, which he painted in the middle of all of this, in the middle of destructive relationships and alcohol and a mind at war with itself, was not a cry for help. It was a declaration. I know where I am, and still I am here. Still I am painting. There is a form of courage in that which has no easy name. In 1944, Edvard Munch died alone at Eckerle. He was 80 years old. Outside, World War II had not yet ended. Oslo was under Nazi occupation, and he, who had spent his entire life painting fear, died inside it. But before he died, he did something extraordinary. He left his entire body of work to the city of Oslo. More than 1,000 paintings, nearly 18,000 prints, more than 4,000 drawings and watercolors, notebooks, diaries, letters, everything. He did not sell, did not distribute, did not leave it to family because he had almost none left. He left it to the city, to the people, as if to say, this was never mine. It was always yours. And Oslo took decades to understand the size of what it had received. The Munch Museum opened in 1963 on the centenary of the artist's birth. And in 2021, a new museum was inaugurated, modern, immense, on the banks of the Oslo Fjord. An entire building dedicated to a man who spent his life feeling he did not fit in the world. Now the world built a home for him. But Munch's legacy goes far beyond museums. It lives in every artist who, after him, decided that art did not need to be beautiful to be true. It lives in German expressionism, which drew directly from his work. It lives in Francis Bacon, who painted bodies distorted by pain with the same brutal honesty. It lives in Frida Kahlo, who used her own life as raw material without apology. It lives in some way in anyone who has ever picked up a piece of paper, an instrument, a camera, anything, and tried to put outside what was inside and had nowhere else to go. The scream was stolen twice. In 1994, from the National Gallery of Oslo. In 2004, from the Munch Museum itself, along with the Madonna. Both works were recovered. But the fact that someone wanted to steal them says something about the power they hold. People do not steal what has no value, and the value of the scream is not in the millions it commands at auction. It is in the fact that you look at that figure and something inside you moves. Not intellectual admiration, recognition. And recognition is the rarest thing a work of art can ever produce. Munch did not beautify pain. He did not pretend. He did not try to make life look smaller than it was. He simply painted with absolute honesty, with a courage that has no easy name. And in that honesty, he created something that crosses generations, languages, cultures, and reaches you today, here, in this moment, and makes you feel something you may not even be able to name. That is the legacy of Edvard Munch. Not the scream, the man who never stopped screaming, even when the world pretended not to hear. Edvard Munch once said that his art was a confession, not a decoration, not a display of talent, a confession. And confessions have that strange power to free us. At the same time, they expose us, to bring us closer to others precisely in the moments we feel most alone. Perhaps that is what the scream has been telling us for over a century, that fear does not need to be hidden to be bearable, that pain does not need to be made beautiful to have value. That there is something profoundly human in looking into the abyss and still remaining standing. Munch remained standing until the very end. If this video touched something inside you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, which artist would you like me to explore next? I am here, listening.